You are listening to Framing the Future podcast, presented by the Architectural Authority magazine.
Hopefully, as a successful practice owner, running a business, doing the type of architecture that I love, I would say to myself, just keep at it, keep going, don't give up, don't be discouraged by not seeing immediate results. Just keep doing it, because even if you don't get any of those things that you're looking for necessarily to be a practice owner, it's still a beautiful way of looking at the world to do architecture.
This episode is sponsored by our partners at Citco USA, with the largest selection of marble in all South Florida. Visit Citco's showroom at Doral and enjoy their extraordinary design collections, including iconic works by renowned artists such as Zaha Hadid, Anish Kapoor, Ferruccio Laviani, Ora Ito, and many more. Framing the Future podcast dives deep into the heart of architecture education and the journeys of those driving the field. We bring you authentic, personal stories from students, graduates, and educators. Let's explore their motivations, learn from their challenges, and celebrate their triumphs. This is your space to connect, learn, and be inspired. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Framing the Future podcast. I'm your host, Ana Paula Leal, and today we have an exceptional guest with us. He holds a Master in Architecture from Florida International University and has made a significant mark in the field through his participation in numerous architectural competitions. His talent has been recognized with awards like the Best Student Portfolio and Best Student Project by the American Institute of Architects. And recently, he earned his architectural license in the state of Florida. As a fascinating side note, he's not just an architect, but also a very talented DJ. So let's dive into his journey and explore more about the intersections of his passions. Welcome, Renzo Luciano.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure. So I have been following your work for a while now, and I have been amazed by the complexity of your projects. And I hope we can dive more into what that process of design is. And to give a little background to the audience, let's go back into the past to where that passion for architecture started. Can you tell us a little more about?
I think if I had to go back to where it started, like way back when I was a child, I've always been a fan of like just the idea, the raw concept of taking a thought from your mind and just turning it to fact. So just the process of taking something from fiction to fact has always been a passion of mine. When I was a kid, I would take train sets that my parents would buy me, and I would make little cities around like Lego towers that I would build. And it was just such a cliche that like the architect playing with Legos, but it's true.
Yes.
Then later on, when I was about maybe 17, 16, I became obsessed with like designing cruise ships. Oh. And I used to come up with like crazy ideas for things that could be on cruise ships, like roller coasters on cruise ships, go-kart tracks. I know all that like exists now.
Nice, yes.
But back then, it was something that I was super passionate about doing. I would build models. And at one point, I was actually going to consider going into naval architecture and engineering. But I kind of ended up opting for staying in Miami to do just architecture. And I also did have a tremendous inspiration on the side of my uncle, who in Peru, he was an architect. And so he also convinced me and kind of inspired me in a way to pursue just, traditional architecture. And so I've been doing that ever since, and I'm in love with it.
And with your uncle, you did a very beautiful project. It's called the Mali New Contemporary Art Wing, and it was your first competition, I believe, right?
Yes.
So can you share the experience of participating and collaborating with your uncle?
So it was really cool because I was part of a team, and my uncle being the owner of his firm, he didn't really have time to like participate himself in the competition, but he kind of gave me and another young architect from that company sort of free reign over the design of that project. And so it was really interesting. It was a very intense period of time in my life. It was actually before I went to university, I did that project because I remember when I moved to Peru the second time around, there was just because the way that the semesters in school work over there, like they start different than they do over here. So I had a period of about 6 months to 8 months that I was kind of just working for him. And that's when I did that competition. And so it was a great period of time that, I was able to test ideas. I had never done this before. I'd never really designed anything, an actual building. But I think a lot of the energy and sort of the seeking of new ideas and things that haven't been done before that I had tried out with the cruise ships before kind of got carried over into this. And so it was a lot of fun. We didn't win, but it was honestly just an honor really to participate. And then having seen that I was going up against, like you may have seen Zaha Hadid, Tom Wiscombe, a lot of international architects, really great architects, even in Peru, local architects that just put out a lot of great work. And just to be part of that was incredible.
Yeah, it's one of the many also architectural competitions that you have done. And I think it's so important also to incentivize people to go to participate in architectural competitions. And how was that transition from architecture in Peru to transferring to FIU?
So it was definitely interesting, but I think that the way that architecture education happens in Peru is a little different from the way it is over here. Over here, we're very used to the format of we do the project crits in the office, in the studio, and then from there you do presentations, you pin ups and all that. Over there, it's not really like that. Over there, it's more of like you're sort of doing the project on your own, and you're sort of just one-on-one with the professor the whole semester up until the midterm and the final. And then for the midterm and the final, you really don't have this big pin-up event like we do here. It's more of just, it's behind closed doors. Like you sort of deliver like a package of like construction documents per se. And then the professors like individually review it while you're kind of outside biting your nails, like really trying to wait to see what they say. And so then I think that was the biggest change, because coming over here, like I remember like the first 2 weeks, there was like, all right, pin up in front of the entire class, let's talk about your project. So I think in that sense, it really helped refine my craft, because it's one thing to do the work, but then it's another thing to really talk about the work. And I think in talking about the work, and even if you're writing about the work, it really helps you to solidify some ideas and really sort of ingrain what your language is moving forward into the next projects that you do.
That's incredible. And what would you say now that you are in the professional field, things that you will improve, that you should, maybe there's something that FIU in the program will have done better to make stronger, workers, designers in the work.
Well, I think that this is kind of like a generalization from all over the country and kind of the world. Like architecture schools have a very big problem of that there's a massive disconnect between the education part and then the actual field of practice. And nobody really prepares you for that. So, most of the times at FIU, when you do a project, you start a project, very sort of concept and art inspired, thinking about, what it is that you want to explore, or whatever it is that the topic of the studio might be framed around, but it's ultimately your project, your ideas. But when you go out into the world, it's a little bit different. You don't have the opportunity necessarily to always explore the artistic ideas. A lot of times it's an afterthought. So what I think that, if I could say that it would be a suggestion to sort of all architecture education, is that you kind of divide it in two, whether that be from the beginning or maybe after like the halfway point where you've kind of gathered like a basic education, about drawing, space, 3D modeling and all that stuff. And then sort of maybe from there divide it into the one path where you kind of become more of a project manager, technical architect who does, all the construction documents, all the project management stuff. And then once you go into, or you can choose to go into the art side of things where you're more of a designer, in the sense where like you begin a project with trying to put forth an idea that is unique to you.
And also the business side, because architecture is also
correct.
A business. And there's so much little that we, like the school teaches about that. And to have an office, to be a company, you need to know things that the school doesn't teach you, like finances or management, like you say. So I think, yes, we should start like renovating and bringing new, change to the school.
Agree.
And let's talk about your projects and the thinking process behind those beautiful projects that you have done. What has been one of the most challenging and also rewarding designs that you have done?
So challenging and rewarding. I think the last project that I did, which is actually for a competition, for a tiny home competition, I haven't shown any material for that yet, just because I'm waiting on the results to be announced. But it was very challenging because it was sort of very sort of specific in the requirements that it was asking for. But then it's also sort of like, what do I want to bring additional to that, you know? And I always think that any project should begin, well, to me, it always begins with sort of what else can I bring to the table beyond the bare minimum requirements that it asks for. Yeah. And then how do you sort of build a narrative around that? So I think that one was a little bit challenging just because there was a lot going on. There was a combination of a tiny house component. There was a public playground component to it. There's a picnic shelter component to it. So it's a lot of things that are sort of just almost like a maximalist agglomeration of architecture that I found very challenging, but also very engaging and fun for me to work on. So I will be posting about that pretty soon.
Nice. And so when you start working on a project from the beginning, that conceptual part, how do you develop the concept and this object? Because it looks like you take like a lot of different, figures, and you play with them. So can you explain more about that process?
Yeah. So usually when I start a project, I think that my projects come from just looking at everything around the world, looking at the world around me, just maybe like mundane objects, things that are just, very common, and looking for another common object and things that seemingly don't go together, and just trying to put them together to make sense in a beautiful way. So in that regard, I'm constantly looking at things around me and just like, I wonder if that could be an architectural concept. And I just sort of archive it in the back of my brain. I don't really necessarily model it in 3D or even draw it sometimes. But I think that constantly looking at the world in that way, when you start a project, it allows you to already have an archive and a library of things that you can sort of pick and choose from that makes sense to the program and requirements of that project. So in that regard, yeah, that's usually how I start a project. I don't really have like necessarily a set beginning, essentially.
Like a magic trick. That's nice. So you say like curiosity is always part of who you are, and also like keeping that eye to see in things the potential in things to create. That's nice. So I really like a project that you did, and it's the bridge.
Okay.
That you did here in Miami. Can you explain more about it, the complexity of the project and where the idea started?
So that project actually began as a project that I did for the office that I work for. And unfortunately, it was a concept that I get is very, very out there. So it wasn't really taken too well there. But I thought that it was an idea that had a lot of potential. So I just kind of did it on my own time took me about a year to model everything and put it together, just kind of on my spare time. But the concept for that bridge is essentially, it's sort of trying to be like a play on scale. So you know how usually you go to these old European cities and you have these large, massive monuments, the Arc de Triomphe in France. And we don't really necessarily have that here in Florida. And, maybe in New York you have a bridge like, the Manhattan, the Brooklyn Bridge, all those bridges that sort of connect the island of Manhattan with the mainland. But here we don't really have that. So it was really looking at how can we create something that sort of embodies that sense of scale for something as sort of simple as a pedestrian bridge. And again, it's sort of like what I mentioned before, that I always try to look at the most mundane, simple things and question, why does it look that way? It doesn't have to look that way. It doesn't have to be that way. We think of it that way because we're just so used to it, but there's no reason why it needs to be that way. We can change things. So it kind of came from that. And then essentially what the project actually is, it starts off with sort of taking two planes and connecting from where the Bass Museum is to where the beach boardwalk is. And then you take those planes, triangulate them, and then you kind of fill at the edges to create the pedestrian access. And then the internal space ends up being this long, narrow, canyon-like space that kind of like you've entered a different world.
Yeah.
And for a second, you kind of forget that you're even in Miami Beach because it's just so massive. But then you have these little vistas and viewpoints that, again, sort of orient you to where you are over the main street, over A1A, or and then overlooking at the beach. So I think that's essentially the pursuit was to sort of take a very, very simple thing, which is a pedestrian bridge, and just blow the heck out of it. Yeah.
That's nice. And so you're working now in Bermejo's Architects, and how is like the environment work there? How was
That's
that?
great.
That's great to hear, because like not all architectural offices are like that. So how's the transition? What are you doing now? What do you like the most about working at Bermejo's?
So I think the thing that I like the most about them is that they're great people. And I think that that's sometimes a hard thing to find in this industry. So, there you hear so many nightmare stories about toxic individuals in the industry. And it's unfortunate that they give a bad name to what we do. But I think that Bermejo really is, they're a good organization. They're great people. They're good to work with. So I think that when you have that, it just creates an environment where people can go to work happy every day and, not be sort of looking over their shoulder of like, what is this? How is this guy going to yell at me or condescend to me today? Because unfortunately that happens a lot in architecture. So that's not the case there. As far as what I've enjoyed working on the most there, I think it was back in 2020, which was actually, so I've been working for Bermejo since 2017. I started off as an intern from FIU. They had the IPAL program back then. And back in 2020, during the pandemic, they hired me as a full-time staff. And I was assigned to work on the Nassau cruise port.
Nice.
Which the task was, they were kind of renovating the master plan for the entire area. And me and this other architect, Jose Sanchez, who worked there at the time, we were tasked with doing the arrivals building, which was this really, really cool idea that we both worked on. That was this sort of curved, almost like banana or croissant shaped volume sitting on top of these two like podium volumes that have these LED mesh screens around them. So I think that project really right out of school, which before school I had been doing more like intern level tasks and just, doing renders, helping out with drawings. I think that project and just the fact that it was really for the beginning for I think schematic design and design development, it was just me and him doing it. And also he brought a lot to the table, having come from a renowned firm in New York. So he really taught me how to like take really complex geometry and really distill it into like something that can be built, and how you can document that along the way, which before I didn't really have. Like I had an idea of how things are done, but until that project, I was like, okay, so when you're putting together something, you need to be thinking about so many different things. How a contractor is going to read what you're doing, because what we do, we don't necessarily tell the contractor how to build it. We give them a set of documents and they make an interpretation based off of that. So how do you make that interpretation the most clear to a contractor and to anybody working on the project is sort of crucial when you're trying to really develop something that's going to get built.
And how's been like the collaboration at Bermejo's between what are the challenges that you have encountered, working with the engineers, the GCs, the interior designers, all these people that you have to communicate constantly with it. How do you deal with that? How do you manage that?
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a challenge. I do think that, there's no knock to any of the people who work on the projects that I work on there. But again, I've always had this, and this happens all over Miami, that I think it's sort of a problem, is that there's a focus on sort of design by committee in a way. And I think that doesn't always yield the best design results. And what I mean by that is when you start a project, most firms in Miami will try to check off every single little box that isn't about architecture. And then at the end, they think, okay, what's the architecture of this? And then at that point, it's probably too late. So I think that that's sort of the biggest thing that I can say that I've noticed, that sort of I'm like, I wish I could change that. But I wouldn't call it a challenge or something that really, would frustrate me in any sort of way. I think I look at it with a positive mindset of, okay, what's the best that we can do given the scenario?
Given the scenario, yes. And what you mentioned before that you were part of the iPad program, and that helped you. That was the intention of that program, is to be licensed or get the license while in school. Can you talk about that? Because there's sort of people that license is really important for them. Others, they are not sure. So what would you...
So the iPad program started, I'm not sure what year it started actually, but I remember when I first heard about it, I was in D6 and they kind of did this little call for portfolios where they were essentially asking students from D6 only that they needed to submit portfolios, and then from there they were going to submit those to several firms in Miami. Bermeo was one of them, HKS, Arquitectonica was another one, and a bunch of other ones. So me and that cohort essentially submitted portfolios to that, and then we'd get interviews, but with those firms, and then they would essentially send a short list to FIU where they would pick the students that they wanted to hire. And based on their list, FIU would say, okay, you've been selected to go over there, you're going over there, you're going over there. And we ended up getting jobs as interns, where studio is, I believe, I don't remember, I think it was Tuesday and Thursday?
Yeah, Tuesday,
Thursday. So we would be working Monday, Wednesday, Friday, a full-time job. And then on Tuesday and Thursday, just full-time studio and all the classes. So the whole point of that was that by the time, since it was starting at D6, which was essentially the halfway point of your architectural education, the one thing that you did have to compromise on is that instead of taking the 5-year track, which would have from D6 been 2 years to finish, you had to take 3 years now. So those 3 years, the objective was that you would get all of your IDP hours, you would essentially be able to have that part done, and you'd be able to study for your exams so that when you come out of FIU, you would have your master's degree and a license. So that was a little bit easier said than done. I think that we all tried our best to do it, but, just being in school, being in studio, you fall in love with the studio product, and it kind of tends to take priority over wanting to sit down and look at a book with that's essentially written in lawyer language.
Yes, that's true.
So I think that was the challenge. But so the only thing that didn't come out of that program was that nobody came out of there being licensed. Everybody came out with their IDP hours. We had a couple of exams already under our belt. Some of them passed, some of them not. But I think it was good experience to really realize, okay, to be an architect, to get a license, there's a lot more to it that you kind of need to study for and really need to kind of buckle down and figure out that's beyond just what you see in school. So I think in that sense, it really opened my eyes, and I think the rest of the people in that cohort's eyes, to really see what architecture was going to imply in the professional field and a professional level.
And then you graduate, and when did you start studying for the exams, or in what was the time frame where you complete all the...
So when I was in school, I took the first exam I took was programming and analysis. I took that one in school, passed it. Then I took practice management, which in school I have no idea how to manage a practice.
Yeah, exactly.
I failed that exam. And then I kind of just that was around the time that I was going to take my thesis. And so I just kind of got discouraged, and I was like, I'll do this later. I'm going to finish my thesis. And then COVID happened. And so then everything kind of shut down, and there was a lot of uncertainty. I had plans to move to New York and get a job over there. That didn't really work out at that time because everything was just closed. So I think it was around mid 2021 that I started to pick back up with the exam studying, and it just became my full focus. And it has to be, because really those exams are they're designed to make you fail. They're very, very, very well written in such a sense that it can confuse anyone. It's lawyer language.
We should have a background in lawyer and then
essentially.
Say the exams. Oh, why do they make it so hard? I don't understand. And it's 6 exams, and compared to other, GCs or civil engineers, which is a more shorter time. But so what would you say to those people that, also feel discouraged because they fail a test and they don't know if they want to continue, or those that are getting just right there? So what would be your advice for them?
I think just keep going, really. You really, like I said, you need to make it your full focus for a good year to really get it done. You need to buckle down and just forget about everything else and really spend your mornings and your nights just studying. Why is it important to get a license? There's several arguments that can be made for that point. But I think that especially here in the United States, maybe not overseas, but in the United States, it kind of legitimizes what you're doing. Because, you can show people designs all day, say, I'm an architect, but does he have a license? A lot of people in the U.S. will think of you that way. If you don't have a license, they're like, oh, he's not really an architect. Not yet.
Yeah. And I know so many people with huge experience and they don't have a license. Yeah. And it's so, so not sad to see, but that their work or maybe is not as appreciated or valuable as someone who has a license. And how has that changed for you getting the license?
So I think it definitely has helped me. Again, because like studying for the exams, you learn a great deal. You learn a great deal about putting a building together in terms of like construction. You learn a lot about practice management, project management. One of the biggest things that I think I learned and where it did help me in sort of thinking about like when you're setting up a project is when you study for practice management, the most important thing that they say to do is to read the contracts. And those contracts, again, they're written for lawyers, they're written by lawyers. They're just they're these legal documents, but that are very, very boring to read. But it's in those exams and all the little like paragraphs and all the little articles, clauses and everything that's what the exams are based on. So if you don't read those, then you're not really getting a basis of when you go out into the real world and you put together a project of how to protect yourself from certain things that are going to be a liability. So I think that in that sense, it was very beneficial.
Nice. And also you have your kind of like office or design is called the
Anomaly department.
Anomaly department. So how do you come up with that name?
Well, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself in a sense.
Yeah.
I'm sort of a little bit in opposition to a little bit of what we spoke about. I try to make architecture out of things that seemingly don't make sense, and I try to make them make sense and try to make them beautiful. I don't know if I'm succeeding at it, but I'm trying to. That's the goal.
The goal.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that? So that then is your philosophy of art, like make things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, honestly, for me, architecture it's so beautiful because it really, in the truest sense, I think that it should be about letting other people experience the world almost through the eyes of a child, with wonder. Like when you walk into a building and you see something that is unusual or something that you've never seen before, a child sometimes would be like, yo, mom, I want to go see that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times adults kind of just, I don't get it. They're kind of like scared and they just kind of want to walk the other way. And I think that that's also, it's a cause and it's an effect of how sort of architecture has become, again, like the art of architecture has become a little bit of like a second thought in how we do things here in Florida or really anywhere. So what I try to do is really begin projects with, again, like what's an unusual idea that I can make sense out of and that I can turn beautiful and check off all the boxes along the way.
All the boxes. On the first, like the architectural boxes, I will say, like, I think also on that note, we need to create spaces that connect with people instead of, make people emotionally sometimes degraded. And with the COVID, a lot of people stay at homes. How many people didn't have a good quality of life or they were depressed, And I think through design, and it also has a lot to do with neuroscience. And it was something like really interesting that while I was in school, I wrote this essay, how neuroscience and architecture, they work together, and specialists in the science field, they were studying people's mind to see how they react to color, light, and based on that, design, and more for hospitals, nursing homes, where people spend also work a whole time in those spaces. So what would you say, what would be 3 advices that you would give to students going to architectural school? Like school is also a lot about, being creative. So how would you tell them, what would you tell them for them to be more curious, more, not that discouraged?
I think in a sense, it's just go back to the original reason why you chose architecture. And I think that if you chose architecture and you're in school and you're doing a good job in school, there's no reason why you should lose that when you go out, out into the professional field.
Yeah. And
I understand how, like, there's this sort of, I don't want to say pessimistic, but it's almost like a very sort of realist, I guess, sort of viewpoint that a lot of, people who have been in practice for many years tell you, oh, this is the real world, this is how it's done. No, it's not. The real world is what you make of it. And I think that people who love architecture and who went to school with a passion for it, they went there because they ultimately had a form of self-expression that they wanted to put forth into the world. And it's just very sad to see so many people just lose that when they go out into the professional field. So what I would say is just keep doing it, enter competitions if you have to, like do things on your own, just passion projects if you have to for a while until you really develop your language. And, I don't want to say it's like wishful thinking, but in a sense it is. But you have to believe that if you're 100% committed to your craft, that the money and the business will follow.
Yes, that's true. And it's follow also curiosity. And there's so many, like once we are working, it can become very monotonous. And sometimes, like you said, we can lose that creativity. And what are things that, let's go into the DJ part, because that's a really interesting topic. And you just recently did a project that embraces that concept between music and also architecture. And that was a competition, right? Too?
Yes. So initially it was done for a competition, and then it just kind of turned into that I submitted it for an award thing in Los Angeles for the A+D Museum. But essentially that was started off as a competition for Miami Design District. Miami Design District has every year this thing that they call the Neighborhood Commission, where they commission artists, designers from around the world to design something that can be on exhibit during Art Basel. And so Art Basel always has a bunch of DJs and DJ musical events that are going on at the same time. It's almost like the after parties for it. So I kind of came up with that idea for this thing that I called DJ Orchestra. Last year during Art Basel, me and my friend Riveron, who's a DJ also from Miami, he's a great musician, talented DJ. We were at a bar and it was kind of empty, and me and him were just kind of talking or whatever. And the DJ was playing, nobody was dancing. And so me and him just kind of like messing around. We started kind of like chanting this like 4-beat loop. I wouldn't be able to tell you what it is right now. But over what the DJ was playing. And so just kind of out of that very playful sort of like me messing around with like one of my friends, I was like, wait a second, what if we make like a DJ booth where people in the crowd have the ability to do what we're doing right now, but on an actual CDJ, on an actual DJ deck? So the product itself is, I'll explain it a little bit right now, is like the theory is that whenever a DJ is playing, he'll have the mixer, which has 4 to 6 channels, and they have a DJ deck and they have another DJ deck. They can have up to 6 decks, but most of the time, most DJs just use 2. Some other DJs like to use the 3rd and 4th deck to put like samples on them, and those samples can just be like a hi-hat, they can be an instrument, they can be a vocal, you name it. So the concept was, if you have one deck where the DJ is playing one track, he has his mixer. At any given point, he's sifting through his collection of music on the other deck, and in his headphones, he's listening to what that track is way before the crowd can hear it. So he's kind of like selecting from his music, and that can be for either an actual track or a sample. So the thought was, if you have 6 channels and most DJs really only use 2, what if we take the other 3 and we sort of orient them towards the crowd, and onto those DC DJs, we sort of only load loops. What a loop is essentially when you have a track, you sort of just take like a section of it and you have it like on repeat.
On repeat.
And a lot of times the music that I DJ is house music. So in that genre, there's a lot of use of samples, loops. So the idea was that on those decks, you'll have a library of loops, and you will have the record box software, which is what it runs on the CDJs.
Yeah.
You'll have that filter out each sample in key and tempo with what the DJ is playing, and that technology already exists. Like, that's already there in place. So essentially what that means is that, like, when people in the crowd who may not necessarily be DJs, they'll have a track list and they'll have certain tracks that are highlighted, which means that those would work with what the DJ is playing. They're in key, they're in tempo. So somebody from the crowd, you, for example, you can go up to a CDJ and be like, this looks interesting. You'll start going through the tracks, and then you'll see a sample that you like, you'll pick it, you'll start queuing it up, you'll play it. You have headphones as well. And then me, the DJ on the booth, in the central booth, I'll have the mixer. And then because I have the ability to hear everything before the crowd hears it, I listen to what you're doing, and I'm able to see, does that really work? Do I like that with what I'm currently playing? And if I do, turn up the channel, everybody can hear it. So in a sense, it's like this moment of like I can just imagine, like, it hasn't been built yet, but I can imagine the euphoria of like somebody who's trying to become a DJ in Miami, because that's such a popular thing, which also was a big inspiration for this project. That if any given event that you go to in Miami, any given club that you go to, I would estimate there's about 70% aspiring DJs in the crowd that are going there to network and try to get a gig there. It's such a common thing. And at any given point, people show up to the club with their USBs. They're trying to become DJs. Yeah, there are memes and everything about this, but it's so true. It's not a joke. So the idea was that if you're a DJ, like, and you show up and you're like, you pick a track, you play it, and then the DJ who's actually in the central booth plays it, you're kind of like, oh my God, he just played my track. So it's like the feeling of like asking for a request, and you actually are able to be the one playing the request.
We need to fund your project, please. That would be so. That would make a difference. And also, you know, like what is that? In March they celebrate the Ultra thing.
Miami Music Week, yeah.
So yeah, that could be such a nice.
Yeah.
Imagine that in Ultra, would be like, yeah.
That'd be insane.
Yes,
I would love that. Yeah.
So let's talk also of one of your projects. Is the latest one that you did is this Airbnb and also LED screen. So how that idea came up?
So that idea actually came up from the previous project that I had done, which was this tiny house competition that I mentioned.
Okay.
Where there was a home and there was a public playground component to it. And it was like a home, and then on top of it, it was you have like a slide that comes all the way down. It's on the second level of the tiny home, and it sort of slides down to the ground floor. And so, without going into more detail on that project, that kind of inspired me to like think about slides, and I was like, oh, slides. So I started thinking about these billboards that we sometimes see like along the highway.
Yeah.
And I just started to think like, what if we can sort of architecturalize these, you know, because they seem like they have like volume and they kind of have like space.
And they take a lot of, you know,
And it's like, not only from the sense of like architecturally, but also financially, there's an opportunity there of that, like, what if you could put like an Airbnb inside, like hidden behind the billboards, where you kind of have these balconies that look out towards like the city. So, and in doing that, then I started to think about, okay, what if we put it over the water? You know, like if you look around where the Perez Art Museum is, they just built like a billboard there. And so if you put it over the water, not only would that be such a like large amount of visibility for the billboards themselves, which I think in Miami generate up to like $30,000 a month each.
Wow.
So, that also gives an opportunity to like be able to slide down from the unit itself into the water that's in Biscayne Bay. So that was a little bit of the thinking, is like, if you have billboards and you have an Airbnb, a very unusual Airbnb that is, you know, that
unique, like, yeah.
So like people will want to be attracted to go to the Airbnb just because of how wild of an idea it is. And it also, say you're not renting it out because, I don't know, it's slow season, you're still generating a bunch of money off of the billboards.
Yeah, that's very smart. Also, like, thank architecture, we need to think also like that, how to create something beautiful, have beautiful architecture, at the same time monetize about it and make it, you know, like everyone is a win-win for everyone.
I agree.
Yeah, and something that you mentioned before, that you were, well, not before, but you were a professor.
Yes.
At FIU. So how was your experience?
It was awesome. I think it was really cool. I had never done that before, and I think it was always like one of those like goals of mine that I always wanted to do. So I found it very interesting to be able to, in a sense, being like a professor is kind of like being like an office manager in a way, that you kind of have to like keep people on track to get the projects done. So I think in that sense, it was a very good experience to be able to take a group of very talented students, which I had, and be able to push them to do their best work.
Which design was that?
That was D9.
D9. So D9, the concept of D9 is... What?
D9, I'm not sure if D9 actually had... No, sorry. It was D8.
Okay, Design 8.
Yeah, so it was... D8 is a really weird studio in FIU for some reason, because it's mixed with it's actually D8 and D9 students that are kind of intermixed. And I remember like same thing, like when I took D8, there wasn't really a set topic to it. It was kind of just very open, and kind of like the professors get to choose what we were doing. But the brief that we were given for that studio, which was from Professor Goldenberg and Professor Andia, which were the ones that were running that level, that studio D89, they had said, hey, what if we just enter this competition for a biophilic house? And so that competition was very open. There wasn't really like a set program. There wasn't really like any square footages that we needed to follow. So it was very fun in that sense of telling the students, what do you guys think a biophilic home is? And everybody had a different version of that. And I just kind of let them run wild with their ideas and, try to orient them as best as I could in the process.
Nice. And so when teaching, what was one of the most, also like rewarding parts? Does that give you also inspiration or how do you take that process of design?
So the biggest thing that one piece of advice that was given to me in the process of, becoming a professor was that you should take the students and kind of use them to advance your interests, your sort of practice, and in a sense almost make them like your employees. I don't know if I understood that wrong or not, but that was kind of like the advice that was given to me. And I think that it is a piece of advice that I understand where it comes from, because a lot of times, people who have a teaching position have their own studios concurrently. And so they will sometimes pick the best students to go work for them.
Yeah.
This happens at all the universities around the world. So I understand it from that point of view. But I kind of chose to sort of just allow the students to bring what they want to bring to it. I obviously I have a certain language that I have on my own that I, not consciously am pushing sometimes again on the students, but it doesn't, seep through in some type of sense. But it's not like I have, like I mentioned, that I have an archive of ideas in my mind. It's not like I'm telling the students, hey, you work on that idea, work on that idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's more like, hey, this is just a framework, and I have a certain way of doing things that is, I think, inevitably going to rub off on people, And when you go to school, I think that this is an experience that we can both speak for. You'll notice that this happens, every studio, almost like depending on the professor, has a different language and certain level of work and, just aesthetic that they expect. And a lot of that is just tied to who they are as a designer and sometimes what they're trying to push out into the world. I don't want to say on their own agenda, but for their own work, Yeah. And I don't mean that as a negative thing necessarily, but my approach was to just let the students have, what do you guys want to do? What's your approach to architecture? How do you see it going? How do you see architecture being put into the world? And just let them really refine that idea.
Yeah, letting them explore, like you give them the tools and they're the ones who have to develop their own, concept. And yeah, I think that's important. I also had, same experience when I was 2 years of architectural school. I had a very, a different professor with a different, a philosophy. And our work was, kind of had our own identity, but at the same time, you could see they all kind of look the same.
Right.
And at some point, it was when I was really frustrated because sometimes I wanted to explore something else, but the professor will, kind of neglect that idea. And it was good because it showed us also, how to think about a space. And he was, a very, good designer. I think it made us think about his way of design process, but didn't give us a lot of freedom also to explore our own ideas. I think, like you say, it's a good and a bad side. It's a balance.
But yeah, I agree with you, because I think that one of the, I'll mention a positive experience that I had from that sort of, influence that we're mentioning of professors is when I went to Japan for D9, actually. I took that studio with Professor Goldenberg and Professor Andia, which are to this day two of my favorite professors that I've ever had at FIU. Just because, again, the way that they think about things is not the usual way of thinking things. And I think that they did influence me and push me a lot to just, be the unusual guy, do the weird things that nobody thinks about or that nobody tries to do. And so in that sense, that studio started off where we went to Japan for 2 weeks. Did you do study abroad?
I the pandemic came.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
It was a year or something. Yeah. And then the master thesis. So
yeah,
we went to Savannah. I went to Savannah. Well, and with Henry, I went to Chicago, and that was a really nice experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we went to Japan for the 2 weeks. We did the whole program over there. And then we came back, and the whole task was within 2 months to design a project, a pavilion for the 2020 Olympics. in Shibuya Station.
And I saw it has like a transparent.
Yes.
Yes.
So that was a
nice.
project that the first half of the studio was run by Professor Andia. And Professor Andia, I had taken the year before for D8, and I already kind of knew what he was about, what the ideas that he was looking for. And so he had a certain expectation, a certain level of work that he was looking for. And I kind of, knew how to navigate that already based on knowing who he was. I had never had a class with Professor Goldenberg. And then Professor Goldenberg came in after the midterm and took over for the second half. Completely different thing. Like, he saw what I had done with Professor Andia, was like, okay, it's really cool, but it can be way cooler.
Oh, okay.
And I remember that was like one of the most like stressful parts, where I was like, I was putting forth ideas, and he was like, it can be better. Go crazier. And then I was like, okay. I remember at the end, I brought him like a super crazy thing. He's like, too crazy. Bring it back a little bit. But it's that process of refinement that you sort of find when you have two sort of, I don't want to say competing, but sort of, two separate voices that are working to bring together one project. And ultimately that ended up being one of my favorite projects from school, which during COVID, because there was nothing to do, I ended up revisiting and sort of doing like some tweaks to that I felt would have made it better.
Nice. And something that I see about you is that you go back to your old projects and make them better. One of those were I think the restaurant in the Nordic restaurant.
Yeah.
It could be. Yeah.
So yeah, that was for another competition.
So competitions are essential here in
I
Europe.
love them.
Yeah, I think it's what keeps you are like very creative and curious, and these crazy ideas are through competitions, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think competitions are a very interesting opportunity because, like you said, they allow you to explore your own sort of ideas, but they are sort of framed by what the brief of that competition asks for. Oh my God, sorry. So they are very much framed by what the brief of that competition asks for, and then you need to sort of put something together, but it's ultimately your thing, it's your idea. And so it's a lot easier to do it like that, to really develop your own language and your own style that way, than if you're tied down to an office, which most of the times they will impose something on you, which we've already spoken about.
Yeah. And there's a web page or a favorite, like...
There's a lot of them.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
There's one specific where you...
I can't say that it's necessarily a specific one. There's a bunch of them, but I know there's one particular website called Buildner.
Buildner.
I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but yeah, they have a lot of interesting competition briefs, which they're usually very international. Like they'll choose unusual sites in different parts of the world, and other parts they don't. In other competitions, they don't really they don't specify a site necessarily. They'll just make it a very open idea as long as you adhere to the program that they're giving you. So in that sense, it allows you to really even explore not only the type of work you want to be doing, but where you want to do it sometimes. So the greenhouse project was in Iceland. It was for a greenhouse restaurant. I can't remember the name of who, like because the idea is that like there isn't it's a student, not necessarily student. It's like an open competition for students and architects, professionals. Anybody can enter, and they give you sometimes like there will be like a client who somehow is in partnership with the people running the competition. And they'll sometimes pick from those entries and see if they can actually build it. So there is sometimes that tied to it. A lot of times it doesn't necessarily happen that way. They'll just give you the prize money and move on. It doesn't always get built. But that particular competition was for a greenhouse restaurant in Iceland. And my concept for that was to just sort of create like an amalgamation of that idea of being in between something, around it, and below something. So, and then it was sort of about exploring the idea of how you can do that all in one building, where in some parts of the building, you're in between the greenhouse, other parts you're above the greenhouse, and other parts you're below the greenhouse. And so it sort of gives you like a very sort of like totality view of everything that's going on in the restaurant. You get to see like the chefs working in the kitchen. You see the food being grown in any given of the spaces in the restaurant.
Yeah, like the client, the people that go there is more, like in contact with all the spaces and all the activity that is happening. It's more engaging. Mm-hmm. That's what we need here. More engaging architecture to the people. It's not sometimes about you, but thinking about all the others. You know? And there is something I want to ask you. What is something that you will say to your future you?
Oh my God.
From here to, I don't know, let's put it like 10 years?
10 years from now?
10 years from now, yeah.
What I would say to myself is just keep at it. Honestly, just keep at it. I think that, again, it's just, it's having a lot of faith in yourself and really just believing in what you do. And I would, if I had to see myself 10 years from now, hopefully as a successful practice owner, running a business, doing the type of architecture that I love, I would say to myself, just keep at it, keep going, don't give up, don't be discouraged by not seeing immediate results. Just keep doing it, because even if you don't get any of those things that you're looking for necessarily to be a practice owner, it's still a beautiful way of looking at the world to do architecture, you know?
Nice. I think we need more people, more designers like you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, because we need to change the way we engage with architecture and educate people about architecture, what a good architecture is. And I think our generation and future generations, they need to take that in mind. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's something that has to happen almost on every level. And you know, again, it might just be wishful thinking, but it's like I've mentioned before, it's that we kind of need city officials and developers that behave more like art gallery curators rather than politicians and businessmen. And I think that if you can do that, our entire city will be like a gallery of beautiful architecture that engages everybody, and architecture that people can feel a sense of pride and ownership for in the city itself, even if you weren't the one who designed it.
yes, what would it take, huh?
Oh, I'm trying to figure that out.
What? Yes, we're the ones who need to take over the city.
Yeah.
City department, this is our turn, huh? Retire. So thank you so much, Renzo, for being here. It has
Thank you
been
for having me.
a pleasure to talk with you and get to know more about your design concepts and that process. So thank you so much for also listening to us, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for listening to the Framing the Future podcast. Your 5-star reviews really help us continue what we do. Please rate your listening experience, and let's keep building this beautiful community together. For exclusive access to more design content, visit thearchitecturalauthority.com or download our app from the App Store or Google Play. Until next time, stay creative.